Hi, and welcome to Brief History Conspiracy. In part two of my chat with Daniel, we really get stuck into psychic powers using remote viewing to possibly communicate with alien races around the universe. We do talk a bit more about how that might be possible, and, we really go down the rabbit hole. So please, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, hit that bell notification. Really helps us out.
Anyway, I'll tell you where I'm coming from a little bit and why I'm really looking forward to doing a video with you and having a chat with you.
Sure, me too.
I mean, I've never really particularly been into spirituality and psychics and ghosts and things. I'll be 100% honest with you. I don't really believe it. I've got quite a scientific mind, and I like things that can be like empirically, measured and things like this. I used to really love ghost stories and things, and then I saw this documentary once about this bloke who could put people in a magnetic chamber, and he could make them think that there were people in there with him, and also by affecting the magnetic chamber, he could affect the person's brain. And it just ruined ghost stories for me. It really pissed me off, to be honest. I really wish I hadn't watched it. But since doing this channel over the last 18 months or so, I've realised, and quite recently, that I go on and on and on about people being open-minded, and that being open-minded doesn't mean just thinking whatever the mainstream media says is a lie. Or whatever the measure, it's actually critically thinking about things. It's actually being open to possibilities that maybe I don't understand.
Something that I found really interesting is that a lot of my research for a while was in psychology, and I found that different largely heritable differences in temperament and personality play a huge role in all kinds of elements of worldviews that we adopt. Like certain people, I think there is a heritable component to whether you're on the left wing or the right wing, for example, or if you're one of there are personality traits such as schizotypy, where somebody is almost predisposed to believe in things like aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychics, and all this stuff. And what I found is interesting is that I think each of these different heritable components can get some things right. That most people from each of these camps tend to be biased towards a certain almost kind of modular. They have a certain kind of module that they think that everything they encounter is a nail that needs their kind of hammer, or an object that needs specifically their kinds of tools. And so, and I think each side tends to get some things. They tend to get some things right and some things wrong, and whether or not what they get right or wrong depends a great deal on this particular situation they're encountering. And
most definitely.
And I think the kind of super high openness, maybe borderline a little nutty type that tends to be into psychics and Bigfoot and all and aliens and stuff, they tend to, they might let in a bunch of garbage with the truth as each different kind of largely heritable module tends to, but a lot of the truth that they let in are quite surprising things. Like I do think things like aliens and psychics are real. Now, some of the elements that accompany the psychic stuff that they tend to uncritically accept a lot of stuff about psychics that is either not true or at least unverifiable. But with that, there is some stuff that is verifiable and has been verified and has been rigorously tested in a pretty conventional scientific manner, and that that's why the military, the U.S. government, and then also the Soviet Union took these ideas so seriously and implemented them successfully often.
Well, this is why I wanted to talk to you particularly, because you came to me. We were chatting on Facebook about remote viewing, and in particularly, I mean, like you said there, the CIA looked into remote viewing, and we've just done a video about the pineal gland, and it'll be going up next week. But one of the things we talk about is that there was a rumor that went round that basically the Russians, as a bit of a joke during the Cold War, said we're looking into psychic and remote viewing and all these sorts of things as a way to trick the Americans into wasting their time on it. And I said, well, yeah, but that falls down a little bit, though, because they didn't just go. What they could have done was go, okay, whoever's the foremost person in remote viewing or psychic. Okay, we're in a room. What's in my pocket? You've got a 20 pence piece. No, it's a pound coin. Get out, you're a fake. That's what the military could have done. But what they actually did was
spend at least 20 years that we know about researching the subject and spending millions upon millions of taxpayers' dollars.
Oates, and the CIA employed her to look at their data, and she found that it was definitely relevant. And they they did successfully use it in spying a great deal.
whatever, that you would go, well, we need that, we need to figure out to block that. We need to, if there's even a 0.1% chance that that's real, we need to research it. But I just, like I said, I go back to that point that I think they could have, if there was nothing in it, they'd have dismissed it really quickly, but they didn't.
Right.
So, well, you actually do research in remote viewing, is that right?
Yes.
Look into this yourself.
Yeah, most of what I do is the protocol I do is SRV, so scientific remote viewing. It's Dr. Courtney Brown developed it. It's a unique protocol. There are a couple different protocols, although they largely overlap in a lot of important ways. But a lot of the veterans of the U.S. government's remote viewing program, like Paul H. Smith, he's a retired U.S. Army major and was part of the staff on the Stargate team.
All right.
Which was their major, the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA worked with, I think it was only the CIA, the Stanford worked with the Stanford Research Institute, and he was one of their main psychics, and he teaches controlled remote viewing of the sort that the U.S. government used. And Lynn Buchanan, he also teaches it. He offers a 4 DVD set on how to do it, and it's something that virtually anyone can learn, and you can empirically verify its results. Just like, you could do it this evening. It's very, very simple to do. It's
well, now that's interesting, because this is what I want to do. This is what I want to learn about it. And walk me through then a basic protocol of what did you call it? Sorry, the scientific
remote viewing. Yeah, and it can get pretty involved. Really the original method that I would direct most people towards is controlled remote viewing of the sort of Paul H. Smith and Lynn Buchanan. But what you basically do is, so if I'm the remote viewer and you're the task, or say I'm the tasker and you're the remote viewer, there's something that I want to know about. I will mentally associate a random set of numbers with the target, like 38742118, and then I'll give you only those numbers, and you repeat the numbers aloud to yourself, and so you don't know what the target is at all, and then you repeat the numbers aloud to yourself once, the sequence, and then you'll get this influx of like a mental vision of the contents of the target, and then basically you begin to draw what you're perceiving, and you go you investigate different elements of it one at a time. Like first you'll do the sensory elements, the 5 senses, and then you'll go to dimensionals, how is it vertical, horizontal, diagonal, sloping? Is it tall, short, wide? And then in stage 4, it's basically I mean, I've heard it referred to as intangibles, or it's a lot of syllables, but qualitative mental percepts. But basically, you get more higher level abstract information about the target psychically.
Okay.
Like, is this a military target that I'm looking at, or is it a religious thing, or whatever?
So is that like trying to put the object into sort of like a context? So you're trying to figure
Yeah.
out what shape it is, what thing it is, or like you said, the tangible things about it. Is it heavy? Is it light? But then you try to put it in a context of, which I can imagine. I mean, if you try to describe a car, say, you can describe the wheels and the shape and the body, but then the stuff you'd want to know that is the the transportation system. It's putting it into a context to understand what it is. Just
right, exactly.
I can draw a car, but knowing it's a car is a bit more.
Yeah, knowing that it's a car is what's tricky about remote viewing, and what makes it difficult for me is that your work it's very so-called right brained. Like it's very it's very intuition based. When the military or when the government was looking to hire remote viewers, they specifically looked for more artistic type people. And like people who are into music and the visual arts and poetry and more creative stuff, which is kind of funny to associate with the military. But
so they don't normally like that sort of thing.
Yeah. So what you end up doing is you're looking at very sort of raw, low level impressions that's acquired through intuition. Like it's, you want to try and avoid like taking high level abstract, like a concept laden guesses at what it is. Like you don't want to say, oh, I think this is the Eiffel Tower or something like that. What you want to describe, all you're doing is you want to describe what it feels like, what its dimensions are, and then you slowly build up, and you can to some degree get this more higher level or abstract impression of it. But what you're mostly trying to do, especially in the early stages, is get raw impressions of what it's made out of, and you won't necessarily know what it is you're looking at. Like there have been instances like they successfully, I think it was Joe McGonigal, he was able to successfully describe a new experimental submarine that the Soviets had been working on. But I think in those cases it's something that maybe specialists in that area are able to infer from his description.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think he probably is able to. I don't want to speak for him, but I think he might have been able to make that inference for himself. But basically, for the most part, you're describing the impressions you get, and then you want to make an inference. If anyone is making an inference, it's at the very end of it, and you're really trying to shut that part of your brain off that wants to step in, and the left hemisphere interpreter module, which kind of it deals with concepts and with high level abstract concepts, and it instinctively wants to take a high level guess at what you're doing, and you're.
Because I mean, I have a psychology background myself. I did a psychology degree. I've worked in mental health for a few years, and I do understand what you mean. There, the brain is pre-programmed to cut corners and to try to understand things. The way it was explained to me was basically that there's too much data coming in, and the brain doesn't have time to process it all, so it cuts corners constantly and tries to categorize things.
Right.
So I suppose you'd want to shut that part of the brain off that's there constantly trying to cut the corners and put it in a category as quickly as it possibly can, because it wants to move on to the next process. It naturally wants to cut corners to cut the processing time down. And I suppose you're trying to get away from that, and
Oh yeah, and the way I do it in the scientific the SRV that I practice is it's actually influenced by something that I think the ancient Hindus and Buddhists had a lot of insight to in terms of the psychology behind it, because if you that kind of interference is called analytic overlay, and the way you deal with it in SRV is, if your brain if that left hemisphere takes a guess at something, you don't want to suppress it. You want to acknowledge it, and then and write down what it is that your left hemisphere has sort of taken that guess at, and then and that sort of, it the ego, I guess, if you want to call it, demands to be acknowledged. And in this case, you neither affirm nor deny. You don't condemn it, but you don't praise it either. You just acknowledge that it's there, and it's almost as if it releases the pressure that it's putting on your mind, and so it just sort of dissipates. So if I'm remote viewing the Eiffel Tower, and then my left hemisphere might say, "Oh, I think it's a World Trade Center," then if that thought that just sort of spontaneously arises in my mind, I'll take a step back and I'll think, okay, analytic overlay, and I'll write down this analytic overlay World Trade Center or something like that, and then I can't believe I just used that example, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, but it's and then I'll just like take a couple second break and just sort of let that analytic overlay dissipate, and then proceed with describing the impressions I'm getting from the target.
Move back to it. Well, I like that. You kind of accept that it happens. I think it's a thing that with cognitive bias, we need to try to do a similar thing. Accept that it happens. Don't try and push it away. Accept it. Understand it. Even maybe it's come from somewhere. That thought's come from somewhere. And maybe, but accept that it happens and then move on from it, sort of thing.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
The intended target with these random symbols, that maybe it functions as a kind of portal to what you're intending, what you want to know about, or what, in terms of the causal mechanisms involved. I interviewed Paul H. Smith. He's a retired U.S. Army major, and he's the guy I mentioned before, one of the original Stargate participants, and we talked a little bit on hypothetical models of what kind of causal mechanisms might be involved, because it certainly seems very counterintuitive from a materialist perspective. But what a lot of remote viewers think is that it validates maybe some kind of idealist or panpsychist view of reality, where mental properties are most fundamental, and then maybe there's some kind of unified field of consciousness that produces the universe, and we as humans are just sort of different perspectives within that field, sort of like the ancient Hindu idea. And I mean, this is all sort of speculative, but I think these ideas become more plausible in light of the causal effectiveness of remote viewing. And I know that the more skeptical type would say that you're trying to explain the unknown with the unknown, but
I like that. We'll do that. Yeah.
But I think, I mean, it's so validated empirically, and it's so easy to validate for yourself, that I think these ideas really do become more plausible. And I really am a skeptic by nature, so it takes a lot for me to accept something as probably true. But
well, that's the thing. I want to be open-minded to these things. And you mentioned there that we may be. There's a quantum physicist, and I forget his name. Terrible with names. But he argued that we may be all. He said, how many consciousnesses are there in the universe? And he said, one. We're all part of one consciousness. And that we're all connected in some way.
Most of the early major quantum physicists that I'm familiar of were advocates of this idea. Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, David Bohm.
It was Heisenberg actually that said it.
Okay.
Thank you. I should remember that. I'm a Star Trek fan, and the Heisenberg principle
Yeah.
is said almost in every other episode, and I really should have remembered that. But now it's Heisenberg that said that.
Niels Bohr accepted that as well. I mean, I can't actually think of any early quantum physicists that didn't accept that. Most of them that I'm familiar with accepted that idea. Some of them were very emphatic.
And there's so much in the quantum universe that is, we'd call it magic. If it, luckily I think we have that separation between the sort of Einstein universe and the quantum universe. And there is that, and luckily there's that. We still haven't quite been able to merge the two. And it's a good thing in a way, because if the quantum universe sort of bled into what we would consider reality, or, the matter and things, anything's possible.
Oh yeah.
And that's when you start getting, but maybe what we're talking about here is that it does merge. And this is why I consider something, a psychic thing, to be impossible is actually perfectly within the realm of physics and science. But just haven't figured it out yet.
My favorite philosopher or physicist was David Bohm, and he was an early major quantum physicist. And his some of his ideas are sort of considered a little bit heretical in quantum physics, because he held that the universe is basically deterministic in just the way it's just as deterministic on a quantum and even maybe subquantum level as Newtonian physics. And he basically held what I would consider a form of panpsychism. I mean, a lot of more philosopher types might split hairs about what exactly he believed, but basically he did believe mental properties were basic, and that intention has as much causal effectiveness as any material as any kind of material reality. And I think that is what we see in remote viewing, that when we begin to explain the try to explain the causal mechanisms of how or why it would even work, the only way we have to have recourse to this idea that mental properties are causally effective, and that you can affect things just by thinking about them, which of course is no news at all to the quantum physicists.
It's a principle of realm, isn't it? I mean, that's Schrodinger's cat all over. I mean, that's a basic principle. It's anything in quantum mechanics, it changes if you look at it, sort of thing. Which makes no sense, but it works. And that's why there's something about quantum entanglement. I'm sure you know what I mean. And that's one of the things with quantum entanglement. They thought, this could be a instant form of communication. You've got two protons quantum tangled, and if if one's up, say, and one, so the other one down, and if you could affect it, you could create a communication thing. And somebody in quantum mechanics went, it won't work, because the problem is, as soon as you look at it, it changes. It's like you don't know what it is, because as soon as you look at it, you affect it by looking at it in very simplistic terms. I mean, far higher than I really understand. I watched the video about why quantum entangled communication work about 9 times. Still didn't really understand it. But the basic principle is, if you look at it, you affect it.
I mean, entanglement of some kind is really... remote viewing is understood as a phenomenon that I think really does prove the basically non-local nature of reality in general, that everything is entangled and connected, and it's entangled and connected by a fundamental a field that is fundamentally conscious and made up of subjective properties or somehow of some kind. And this is I think the more data we get into remote viewing, the from a materialist perspective, it really makes it's absurd. But from an idealist perspective or panpsychic, I think it ends up making perfect sense. What they I think at the beginning they suspect that electromagnetic phenomena might play a fundamental role in its the causal mechanisms, but that doesn't seem to be the case, which makes it very mysterious. Because with something like electromagnetic, the greater the distance, the more time there is, the more delay there is, and that doesn't seem to be operative at all. They actually, one of the CIA's best psychics, Ingo Swan, they had him remote view Jupiter, and he described rings around it. And I hope I'm getting this right. I'm getting my planets mixed up, but I'm pretty. Yeah, they had him remote view Jupiter, and
Jupiter does have rings. They're really thin.
Yeah,
so you can't really. They're hard to see.
He described it as he described the rings before we actually knew it had rings, and we thought it was an error at the time, and then eventually they discover that it does have rings, and this sort of, so you're able to mentally acquire information that is extremely far away, but it's just as instantaneous as if you're describing something that's right next to you. The declassified CIA files talk about remote viewing what they think are an alien base on Titan, one of Saturn's moons, and so that's quite far away. One of the guys who headed it,
that would actually make sense if there was an alien species coming to us, and a Titan moon would completely make sense, to be honest, because you'd have easy access to water, liquid water. You'd have, I think, gravitationally, it's similar to Earth. It's about 90% that of Earth, I believe, off the top of my head. So as a place for a base.
Yeah, it does have some oxygen as well. I'm not sure how much, but
if you've got water, you've got oxygen though. So you know, anywhere that there's liquid water, you're away, sort of thing. You'd have everything you needed. So that would make sense to me.
I was really taken aback by how frank some of the, many of them were pretty high-ranking officers were about the usefulness of remote viewing and exploring extraterrestrial phenomena. One of the guys who headed the psychic research, Major General Albert Stubblebine, just came out and said that, we use remote viewing to find that there are actually machines on Mars of some kind. And you have quite a few high-ranking officers who were pretty open about it and excited about it too.
It's one of the reasons why we're so desperate to get back there. That is true, though, even remotely true. Elon Musk won't be allowed to go.
Yeah,
so there'll be some sort of accident.
Yeah, there are some people, Air Force Colonel Ross Diedrichson, and then Maurice Chatelain, who I think he was high up there in the a communication specialist with NASA, and I don't know if this is true, but they said we were warned off the moon. They're like, you guys are not, don't come back here. And I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but maybe.
I actually we did a video when it was the 50th anniversary of the moon, and one of the things we actually said was, we went. I don't think the American government were actually that convinced they were coming back, but we went and they made it back, and woohoo! They're looking at going back again, and it's really, really hard. And maybe because we're going back with higher standards, we actually expect the astronauts to come back, which we weren't really bothered about maybe in the 60s, but I'm sure they were bothered, but you know what I mean. It was the risk was acceptable. But everything they talk about us going back to the moon is incredibly difficult, particularly to stay there. But we are going back because we're going to mine the crap out of it. And we just are. We're going for the titanium and everything else that's there. So if that was true and we were warned off, what's changed?
Yeah, I mean,
Something's changed.
The one of their best psychics, who I alluded to, the CIA's Ingo Swan, he was tasked, and he discusses this in his book Penetration. He was tasked with remote viewing who is on the moon right now, and he claims that there actually are miners there right now, and that there's some kind of extraterrestrial being, but they're basically humanoid in appearance. They look a great deal like us, and he was upset about it. He was because I don't think they told him what he was remote viewing beforehand, and I hear this I mean, if people who study UFO phenomena hear this constantly, that these aliens, they speak telepathically, and they have psychic abilities similar to ours, but much more advanced. And he claims that, and I've heard this. You see this a lot in the declassified CIA files, that the aliens he allegedly remote viewed were aware that they were viewing him, so they were initially startled, and they're like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And like set off some kind of alarm or something, and he was freaked out. I think he ended the session right away and told them they know that I'm looking at them, and oh God, are they going to hurt me? And they're in the CIA, and it's like the man presiding over him was like, "Oh no, don't worry about it. We don't think that they're hostile or anything."
Yeah, wait, actually, you'll be fine. If you see all that stuff like cattle mutilations and abductions, it's not true. Don't worry about it.